the iCloud.
Yeah,
And I'd
there it
like
is.
to introduce Kylie Briggs from the Orion Society, who has been in the Northeast Kingdom for what, 4 years now?
A little longer than that, pretty
Li-
close. I've lost count. I moved up here in 2017. Grew up in the Champlain Valley, though. Spent most of my time somewhere in Vermont.
Very good. Well, you
Uh,
crossed over the Green Mountains to the another great part of the state and the Northeast Kingdom. And so I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the lives of wood turtles here in in the Northeast Kingdom, especially, but in Vermont and the Northeast. Go ahead, Kylie. It's all yours.
Yeah, sure. And I guess the last thing I'll say about my move to the Northeast Kingdom is since even in high school, I had this particular fondness for the Northeast Kingdom. And I had this idea in my mind that if I could one day live in a place that has mink frogs, I would know that I have succeeded or, accomplished some sort of life goal. And I do have mink frogs within earshot of my house now. So check. All right, so yeah, thanks for having me this evening. I was asked to give a presentation about the wood turtle, a species that I've been working with for a number of years now. And before I get into all of that, I just want to introduce the group that I work for, the Orion Society. We're a nonprofit organization that focuses our efforts on conserving critical habitat for rare reptiles and amphibians. Most of our work up to this point has been in the southeastern United States, really focused around this animal, the eastern indigo snake, largest snake native to North America. But it's really difficult to think about conservation and management from a single species perspective. The indigo snake depends very strongly on this animal, the gopher tortoise, which digs deep burrows that many other species use. The indigo snake depends on that for overwintering, surviving the winter. And the gopher tortoise has not fared very well in habitat where natural fire has been removed from the landscape. So we do a lot of prescribed fire down there, not something that I think about very much when I'm working on wood turtle conservation projects. Um, so before I talk about wood turtles, I just want to very quickly list off the other turtles that we have in Vermont. It surprises many people to learn that we have 7 or 8 species, depending on if you count box turtles as native. So in rapid fire succession, starting on the top left here, we have the spotted turtle. That's a critically endangered turtle in Vermont, possibly our rarest vertebrate, but there are a couple other contenders. Northern map turtle to its right, that's a species that we have pretty common in Lake Champlain, but nowhere else in the state. Spiny softshell, that's another critically endangered species here, only found in northern Lake Champlain. Bottom left, eastern musk turtle, also called a stink pot or stinkin' Jim. You can see where I'm headed with that. It's another one of our Lake Champlain species. In the middle, eastern box turtle. We used to think those were all, whenever they turned up in Vermont, that they were a released pet, but it now looks like down in the Brattleboro area, those probably are native. And these two on the bottom right are the ones that most people are familiar with. Painted turtle on the bottom. That's one that we have in pretty much every lake and pond and wetland in the entire state. And then, of course, the snapping turtle, which in addition to living in pretty much every lake and pond, also lives in every river. If there's permanent water, there are snapping turtles. Which brings us to the wood turtle. I'll just describe the turtle real quickly. This is a medium-sized turtle. They get about 9 inches long. They have a black head, mostly brown shell, but not always. I'll show you some other examples of what their shell might look like in a moment. When they're young, their shell has this really interesting textured pattern to it, almost as if it was carved out of wood. And then I think what the most distinct feature is that most people notice right away is that they have orange legs and an orange neck. Sometimes they can be a little darker, but that definitely stands out when people see them. This is an example of another just typical wood turtle, not quite as vibrant as the one before, but pretty classic wood turtle. And this is one of the most brilliantly patterned wood turtle shells that I've ever found. This is in the upper Connecticut River Valley. And I've seen a couple others that had shells similar to this, but this one I think takes the cake. It's pretty unusual to see wood turtles with shells quite this brilliant. So the wood turtle is considered globally endangered, although its status from state to state varies quite a bit. But they have some sort of legal protection in every state that they occur. Here in Vermont, they're considered a species of special concern, so not quite threatened, but definitely they're in trouble. And the way I like to think of them is that they're widespread in Vermont, but uncommon almost everywhere they occur. And you could compare that to like the endangered turtles that are only found in very small places like northern Lake Champlain. But in that area, they might be somewhat abundant. The wood turtle is just all over the place, but not a species that you'd expect to run into on a day-to-day basis. Their habitat, this is really a river valley specialist. They overwinter in streams, but then they spend their summer and spring mostly on land, and they can travel pretty far from water, upwards of 1,000 feet, sometimes a lot more, but most wood turtles will stay within that 1,000-foot zone. And it's not just any river that these turtles are looking for. It's really the valley streams where the rivers can meander back and forth, lots of twists and turns, perhaps some oxbow wetlands. And there are plenty of rivers on the Conti National Wildlife Refuge that meet this sort of description. And what I look for in particular when I'm scoping out places to do wood turtle surveys would be to look for those sand and gravel bars on the inside turns on these meandering rivers. Sometimes those sandbars aren't visible, but something that jumps right out at me as good wood turtle habitat. And how they're going to use the landscape around those streams. So I mentioned there's that 1,000-foot zone where they'll spend most of their time, but somewhere around 90% of their time, they'll be within about 300 feet of the river. So that's the blue margin here. The yellow would be the 1,000-foot zone. We'll talk a little bit more about how they use that landscape in a little bit. But my reason for including this photograph is really to demonstrate that this is a turtle of both land and water. All of our other turtles in Vermont are aquatic, except when they're laying their eggs. And then the box turtle is the opposite, fully terrestrial. And the wood turtle splits both of its time, this time across land and water, and they're just as comfortable in both settings. So turtles, when they need to warm themselves up, they'll sun themselves. When most turtles are basking, they'll just pick a rock or log out in the open. If they need to escape a predator, all they have to do is let go, sink into the water, and they can get away. Because wood turtles spend so much time on land, they don't really do that. So what does the wood turtle do? This is a classic example of a wood turtle sunning itself. So its butt is just sticking out of some vegetation. We'll give you a little circle here to clue you in. It's covered in some debris. This isn't very noticeable. If you were just walking the riverbanks, not very likely to see this turtle. And they're still getting sunlight down there. If I were to put a thermometer down right next to this turtle, it might be 10 or 15 degrees warmer than the surrounding landscape. So definitely a place where they can get toasty and also avoid being seen. This is another example of a good wood turtle hiding spot. If you're just walking through this river valley, you'd never know there's wood turtle in here, but if you get real close, there is one hiding in the brambles at the base of that shrub. It really takes time to develop a search image and learn how to find these turtles on purpose. Here's another example of one in a little bit more of an open setting. I was doing a workshop with about 5 other people. We were standing in the woods chatting for about 15 minutes before I noticed that there was this wood turtle on the ground in the leaf litter staring right back up at us. Very easy to overlook these turtles. They're just incredibly good at hiding. And as a result of that, when I'm looking for places to do surveys or do some sort of outreach for conservation purposes, something I hear a lot is along these lines. Well, I've lived here for over 50 years, and if there were orange-legged turtles in my field, I'd know about it. Then after going out and doing a survey, maybe taking the farmer along with me, we find a couple turtles and they say something a little more along these lines, which loosely translates to, I am surprised and stand corrected. Something that's really cool about wood turtles that doesn't apply to most of our other species is that as they grow, they develop growth rings that you can use to roughly age the turtle. So each of these armored plates on the bottom and top of the shell, they're called scutes. Every year they develop a new ring on that scute, and you can count those rings to get their age, just like when you're counting the rings on a tree. The difference here is that a wood turtle only grows for about 20 years, and they can live quite a bit longer than that. And over time, after they've stopped growing, their shells start to wear down. Those growth rings disappear, both on the bottom of the turtle and the top. And from that, we can roughly estimate how old these turtles are. So how worn is the shell? In order for the turtle shell to be completely worn, top and bottom like this, that should take about 80 years. And we have pretty good evidence to suggest wood turtles can easily live into their 90s, but it's just really difficult to definitely age these older turtles. You have to catch them when they're very young, mark them or document them in such a way that someone later can find that same turtle again and figure out specifically which turtle it was. But that would need to happen 60 or 70 years later. And it's very, very rare for that sort of long-term recapture to happen. This is the same turtle, just showing the top of his shell. I'm actually hoping to see this turtle on Friday. I'm going back to the spot where he lives. I'm confident that he's at least 80, but can't prove it. Wood turtle reproduction. They mate usually in the spring and the fall, but they can really mate any time of year, really whenever males and females encounter each other. But that happens most often in the spring and fall, because those are the times of year when the turtles are active, but in the river. In the summer, they could be thousands of feet away from the river, and it's more of a needle in the haystack. So really early spring, mid to late fall is when breeding tends to occur. Where they're going to lay their eggs, a sand or gravel bar right on the bank of the river is their preferred nesting habitat. A place like this concerns me a little bit, where you have a farm field right up against the edge of the bank across from the nest site. Chat about that in a few minutes. But in situations where they don't have this sort of sand or gravel bar nesting habitat in the same place where they live, they'll travel upstream or downstream, sometimes several miles, or they'll travel upland and nest in people's gardens, backyards, cornfields, some high-risk situations. So really not ideal for them to be making those trips to dangerous places to lay their eggs. 4 to 12 eggs generally, and the survival rate of those eggs and the young are pretty low. This is just a short video I'll show you of some female turtles, wood turtles nesting in one spot. If there's a good nest site, you'll have a lot of turtles that flock to that same spot to lay their eggs. And hopefully this transmits through Zoom. So here we have, in a moment, there'll be 3 wood turtles just meandering around looking for the perfect spot to lay their eggs. And they might spend several days looking for the perfect spot, dig a few holes. Here's one in the center. You get the butt waggling back and forth. She's digging a hole, but she doesn't really like it, gets halfway done, and then breaks off to lay her eggs, dig a hole somewhere else. And eventually this is the spot where she does actually lay her eggs. And this hatchling turtle is really just in here for the cute factor. I don't have much to say about it other than daw. What does the wood turtle eat? They are opportunistic omnivores, which is a fancy way of saying they eat a little bit of everything. When they're young, they eat their diets are really high in protein. Anything wriggly that they can catch, earthworms, amphibian larvae like tadpoles, snails are a really big part of their diet. And as they grow, they start incorporating more and more vegetation into their diet. And by the time they're an adult, they're pretty much mostly an herbivore, but then just opportunistically will definitely gobble up a snail or rotting frog, something that they find that is just irresistible. So I probably wouldn't be here talking about wood turtles if there weren't some serious problems facing their populations. I'll go just like list off the major threats here and go into more detail on a few of them. Roadkill is a really big one. Agricultural machinery in floodplains, haying equipment in river valleys, especially where there isn't a sufficient riparian buffer, can be a really big drain on their numbers. Direct habitat loss and fragmentation is definitely a concern. Invasive vegetation, Japanese knotweed, for example, can overrun their nest sites, shade them out, and then those turtles have to make those trips to more dangerous places to lay their eggs. Illegal collection is it's hard to predict on a site-by-site basis, but some populations have been hit very hard. and subsidized predators that there are more of now due to human activities. This is a good example of what I consider former wood turtle habitat. This is a valley stream with hay fields on both sides and a big road paralleling the stream. The rivers that these turtles live in and around tend to be surrounded by very fertile soils that are good for farming, and they're the easiest places to build roads. So those two biggest threats that are affecting wood turtles are most common across the landscape in the wood turtle habitat. So it's not a good combination. I will say just a little happy story here. So I'm going to have to revise this slide because a couple years ago, a riparian buffer was actually planted along this very stretch of river, and I'm optimistic that the wood turtles may return. Graphic image in just a moment. If anyone does not want to see a dead wood turtle, this is your warning. Here we go. So roadkill. We're going to dwell on this for just a moment. Huge problem for the turtles. It only takes the loss of 1 or 2 turtles per year for most populations due to human causes for those populations to decline and within about 75 to 80 years actually be completely wiped out. That's just 2 per year. And that's assuming there aren't other problems limiting their reproduction. Where I found this carcass is a site where I found, I think, about 4 dead wood turtles in the last few years. And those are just the ones that I'm finding. I don't drive that road very often. So that's a site where that road could be the biggest threat to the population. Agricultural machinery, if anyone turned away, we're back to live turtles now. So this is a site where I've been studying wood turtles for a few years now. We've gotten to know how they use the landscape here pretty well. And this one turtle gives me a heart attack every spring. He has a radio transmitter on him, and about the time that these fields are tilled, he just hangs out right on the edge of the field, watches the disking equipment pass by. Sometimes he gets missed just by a foot or two. He was literally hiding right here while the tractors were out. Very easy for this turtle to get whacked. It's really just a numbers game. I think eventually the tractors will catch up with him. This is a turtle that I've also gotten to know quite well. When I first found her, she was already missing her front left foot, and I can guess why. But since I found her first, she was fitted with a radio transmitter, and that's how I'm able to find her multiple times. She was hit by haying equipment and lost a few inches off the top of her shell, right above her right shoulder, so right here. And she's actually been nicked by farming equipment once since then. And the solution in situations like that isn't to move the turtle somewhere else. They have really strong homing abilities and would try to get back. Even if you move her miles away, she would try to get back, maybe cross many roads in the process. So instead, in cases like this, the approach would be more to find a conservation solution like on the property to lower the risk to the turtle. Here's another turtle that we've been tracking for a few years. She might be in her 60s, hard to say exactly, but this gash on her shell could be decades old. And that looks like a pretty classic either haying or disking injury. It doesn't look like she was hit by a car, but again, with these really old injuries, we're just making an educated guess. This was from the same property where those fields were being tilled a few slides ago. So stand to reason, tilling equipment would be likely. So going back to how these turtles use the landscape. So again, the blue boundary here is that 300-foot zone where they'll spend most of their time, yellow being 1,000 feet. But when you have agricultural equipment right up against the rivers, they tend to gravitate towards the edge habitat as opposed to heading out into the center of fields. So the area highlighted in red here is what I consider the danger zone. While some turtles probably do go into these more gap spaces outside of the danger zone. It's these areas outlined in red where I think the risk of turtles being hit by haying equipment is the greatest, especially when there isn't a buffer. Japanese knotweed and other invasive plants, as I mentioned before, they can overrun the turtle's nesting habitat, drive females into other locations to lay their eggs, and may also impact food availability, but we know a little bit less about that. Subsidized predators, raccoons are the big one, even though these animals can get fat on a diet of human garbage and their populations can explode near farms and near just residential areas, they're still wild animals and they still eat their wild food. Turtle nests are a really big part of that, and especially where there aren't many places for the turtles to lay their eggs, all the turtles will go to those few good spots, and the raccoons learn where those places are. Sometimes there could be 90% of the eggs being eaten the same night that they're laid. They don't last very long. And raccoons, as well as a few other predators, can also gnaw the legs off of turtles. Sometimes they survive that. This is a juvenile turtle that I found that had both of his front legs gnawed off by some sort of animal. Losing both front legs is not good. Probably something that very seriously affects their chances of survival. But these injuries have healed. This isn't recent. These wounds are at least a couple of years old. And while losing two front legs is definitely extreme, it's very common to find them missing at least one leg or having damage on two legs. But I found at this point, I think 4 or 5 healed wood turtles that were down to just a stump on their front legs, and dozens that were missing at least one leg. So that turtle with no front legs is just kind of cool. Watching it actually move upstream against the current without front legs. This turtle, I had found it, figured it wouldn't go very far. I looked down at my backpack for a minute to put my camera together, and I looked up and the turtle was gone. I spent maybe half an hour looking for it downstream, figuring that's where it would go. But then when I gave up and resumed my survey, I found him about 100 feet upstream, which I thought was kind of cool. Turtle trafficking. It may surprise you to learn there's a thriving international black market for a few species of rare turtle in the Northeast. Wood turtles are really high on that list. I personally have been contacted by importers from Hong Kong asking what my price list was, wanting to arrange have me drop the turtles off with some sort of courier. And this is just a recent screenshot of turtle trafficking in the news. Thousands of illegally collected turtles are picked up at JFK International Airport every year, and sometimes it's thousands at once, which can pose a really big issue. And there are several populations of wood turtles where really robust populations were almost entirely destroyed by a single poacher. I mentioned before, it only takes the loss of 1 or 2 turtles per year due to human causes to cause eventual localized extinction in some areas. A single poacher, if they know what they're doing, can remove 20 from a site in one day. So as a result, it's very important not to advertise the locations of wood turtle publicly, which is why I don't tell you where I'm doing surveys and presentations like this. And then there's also incidental collection, not for illegal or nefarious purposes, but when people find turtles out on a trail, they often take them home. And in areas where there's a lot of human recreation near important wood turtle habitat, it can really add up. So this is a really well-cited study. Everyone that studies wood turtles knows this, and I'll just read you an excerpt. Throughout our study, the size of the forest remained the same, road building was restricted, and the quality of air and water were constant. So no changes to the habitat. Wood turtle populations remained stable when people were denied access to the property. It was gated. And when this area was open to human recreation, hiking and fishing, both populations of wood turtles declined steadily. The total number of turtles in both populations declined by 100% in 10 years. And the only thing that happened is a gate was unlocked. Now, that's not to say wood turtles and human recreation are incompatible with each other. We have many examples in Vermont of places where there's human recreation at wood turtle habitat. The wood turtles seem to be doing fine, but this is an extreme case and an example that's definitely worth considering. So outside of all that doom and gloom, what can actually be done about it? And there are a few things, and I'll run through here. I think I might have got my slides a little out of order, but that's okay. I'll just list off the really big things first. So first and foremost, riparian buffers, getting some space between rivers and human land use. That'd be residential areas, farm fields, just a strip of habitat for the turtles. We'll just go through one by one. These buffers are becoming much more common across the landscape. Lots of different organizations are installing riparian buffers on private lands. The buffers are primarily there to improve water quality, reduce erosion, but also to create habitat for wildlife. And wood turtles are a huge beneficiary of riparian buffers. How wide should a buffer be for a wood turtle? The official recommendation is 300 to 1,000 feet, and that's depending on how important the wood turtle population is. Neither of those numbers are practical in most cases. And what this yellow line is showing you is what a 300-foot buffer would look like in a typical Vermont river valley. That is the entire farm. So achieving wood turtle conservation in a place like this isn't going to happen by approaching a landowner, a farmer, and suggesting that they stop farming. I would need to bring enough money to that farmer for them to retire. And even then, that might not be enough, because this is a way of life for many people. However, the way that I think about it is that any buffer is better than none, and the bigger the better. So if there's a site that has wood turtles, or that has a significant population of wood turtles, it's a very good justification for creating a larger buffer than would normally be considered. 35 feet is the minimum for a lot of organizations or agencies. NRCS, for example, they're really looking for 35 feet or more. But really, we'll take anything. And if a landowner isn't willing to do 35 feet, I would settle for less. But if they would consider more, even better. And other conservation options that aren't quite as high on the list, but on a site-by-site basis might make a lot of sense. Winter-only logging in that 300-foot zone, that's a big one. Late season brush hogging. A lot of landowners, especially those that aren't farmers themselves, might be keeping their meadows in the valley open for aesthetic purposes. And you can do that by mowing the fields after October 15. By that point in the year, the wood turtles are back in the stream and you can mow safely. So it's a balance between what the landowner wants and what the wood turtle needs. Creating or restoring nesting habitat can be important, especially if wood turtles are nesting on the side of a road or in farm fields because they lack good nesting habitat close to the river. And that goes hand in hand with invasive plant control if those invasive plants are on top of what could be nesting habitat. But then also careful recreation planning. First and foremost, if a new trail is going to be built either for hiking, jogging, or especially ATVs, those really should be designed to avoid sensitive habitat for wood turtles, especially nesting habitat. But if it's possible to keep those trails out of that 300-foot buffer around the wood turtle streams, that's even better. And my overall way of thinking about wood turtle conservation is that really every property is different. What landowners need from their land is different. And then how the turtles are using each property is going to be different. So a one-size-fits-all approach isn't necessarily going to work for wood turtles, although there are things that, such as riparian buffers, that will be applicable to many, many properties. But it really is something that should be approached on a case-by-case basis. And a lot of times wood turtle conservation does require some out-of-the-box thinking. And thankfully, wood turtles are also just very good ambassadors for conservation because they're so secretive. People don't tend to know that they're around, and people can't be motivated to protect something that they don't even know is on their land. But if you can take a landowner out into their river valley, walk the stream, find a wood turtle and put it in their hands, it's an experience that they're going to remember forever. And it really does have an impact on a lot of people and can make the difference between a landowner deciding to do some sort of conservation on their land or just keep doing what they were doing before and maintaining that status quo. But people really just need to meet the turtle, or at least know that they're out there. So I'll wrap things up there. And I think we're about where I expected in terms of time. So happy to answer some questions or chat a little more.
Thanks, Kylie. Maybe, if you could just stop sharing your screen and we'll see what we have for questions.
I just want to real quick before I stop sharing, just if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm sure my email address can be distributed, but it's right there on the screen. And if people find wood turtles, we want to know about them. Can't conserve a population if we don't know the wood turtles are there.
Well, that was fascinating. Thank you so much.
And
You're quite
Michael,
welcome.
go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, a couple of questions. One, you mentioned for aging, you do tagging. I'm familiar because I do a lot of work with ducks, and I know we ban ducks. How do you do it with turtles?
Yeah, so two things. The most common method is to use a metal file to create shallow grooves around the edge of their shell. You're filing the material that you're filing into is keratin. It's very similar. It's the same as our fingernails. That mark is more or less permanent, and there are coating systems that you can use. So on the edge of the turtle shell, there are 12 scutes or marginal scutes, those little tiny plates around the edge of the turtle. Each one has a different number that corresponds to it. And with the different coating systems, I could pick up Notch turtle, stare at it for 10 seconds and say, this is number 341, just by like adding up the different numbers that correspond to those notches. And microchipping is becoming more common. Better for law enforcement, because when they pick up turtles at JFK or something, they can actually figure out, scan the turtle, get the code, and figure out which state the turtle came from and take it from there. The notches also can break off if the turtles get smashed into a rock during a winter flood or something. The edge of their shell takes a lot of damage. So a notch is more or less permanent, except when it isn't. Those microchips last, we think, around 70 years or so. So that's also going to last pretty much the life of the turtle, considering that very few will live to 90.
And second question is different ilk. Is you mentioned buffer strips. I know I've worked with a lot of, especially like Trout Unlimited, we have worked on buffer strips. It's hard enough to get 50-foot buffer strips, and everyone, all the fishermen said, well, they should just be giving you the buffer strips, but they don't look at the side from the farmers, is that they're losing productive corn land and stuff like that. And I have always said, hey, if you want the buffers, sometime you have to pay the piper. And I'm sure you probably, I was going to say, when I heard 300 to 1,000 feet, I said, good luck. I said, but do you do stuff like that? Can you work with people who are you going to pay for so much per river run foot to compensate a farmer for lost production?
Yeah, and there are a couple programs in the state of Vermont, either through Fish and Wildlife and ANR, or at the federal level, NRCS.
Right.
There are various programs that can compensate landowners for taking land out of production, and wood turtles, and a lot of those programs, like through NRCS, it's a competitive program. When a landowner applies to enroll in one of those programs, their application gets a score. Wood turtles add points to that score and makes their proposals more competitive. And I'm actually working on a project right now, doing outreach to landowners to try to recruit people to sign up or apply for NRCS programs. It's through a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, and any landowner that we bring to NRCS, they don't just get the wood turtle points, they get the Conservation Partnership Program points from that grant. So adds an extra level of more bonus points to make those applications more competitive. NIFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, they will be releasing their updated Northeast Business Plan in the coming weeks or months, and it will include wood turtles as one of their priority species for the Connecticut River Basin, which is also going to help. So at the end of the day, a lot of times it does take financial compensation, and a lot of people don't want to work with the government. And if that's the case, it's a little harder to find a way to pay that farmer. But at the very least, we could find a way to put the trees in the ground without them needing to pay for it.
Thanks. Very interesting presentation.
Yeah.
Anyone else with a question? It was a wonderful presentation.
David's seen this presentation or something similar a few times now, and has maybe doesn't remember the whole thing, but I think it gets a little better, and the pictures get a little prettier every few months. So he's seen the progression starting from like 2018 up until now.
Yeah, I mean, even then you had some really great pictures and a great presentation, and it's it's really well done, and I admire the quality of that presentation. Excellent. And
I
we
agree.
also have Sam Main, who's here. He's with the Essex County Conservation District, and so I don't know if you've had a chance to meet Sam, but
So I was actually about to jump in. Kylie, I have worked previously with Levi Brown quite a bit, so I've heard
Cool.
about you. Good to put a face to the name.
Yeah,
So I actually did have a question. So I saw a lot of pictures of smaller streams. Do they use bigger rivers like the Connecticut as well?
yeah, they certainly do. As far as like where are the wood turtle hotspots, they tend to be in like the secondary or tertiary streams. So like, instead of the main branch of some of those bigger rivers feeding into Connecticut, they'll either be like pretty far upstream or in the tributaries, like the second branch or the west branch, because like every river has each of those. But my rule of thumb, as far as like what type of river could be have like a strong population, is like a toddler shouldn't be able to throw a rock over the river, but an adult should be able to. But they are going to be in those bigger rivers. Like they're definitely in the main branch of the Connecticut and most of the other major rivers feeding into Connecticut. But I think what's working against them is flood intensity. Strong late winter, early spring floods are one of the larger sources of natural mortality for the turtles. They can they can drown or get severely injured by getting smashed into a rock or something, or buried under 3 feet of mud. And I think that's the main reason that they're less abundant in the larger rivers. I think Connecticut's probably better than on the other side of the state, like all the major rivers flowing into Lake Champlain. Just once you get to the valley, it's too floody, and also too many water quality issues accumulating from all of the tributaries upstream.
So Kylie, you said, I think if I got it right, 4 to 12 eggs? That doesn't seem like many.
Not very many, but they'll keep at it their entire life after they start. So it just 4 to 12, but that could be something that they do for 60 or 70 years, which adds up.
Is that per year?
That's part of why
And that's
the
once a year?
survival of adults is so important to
Yeah.
the viability of their populations. Sorry, what were you saying?
Is that like once a year?
Once a year, yeah. Late May through early July generally is what we see up here.
And what's the gestation period? And how?
Yeah, 2 to 3 months. In Vermont, I find it's usually mid-September is when most turtle eggs are hatching, but I've seen it as early as August 10, and it can happen later. But if you think about like chicken eggs, which that only takes 3 weeks, a chicken egg is incubating at about 100 degrees. But under the soil where a turtle egg is laid, that's like 70 degrees, maybe even cooler. It's just a much slower process.
And you probably included this. There's a lot of information in that presentation, so I'd love to see it again. But how do they overwinter? Is it just by burying themselves?
Oh, yeah. I actually don't think I mentioned that. They'll find a place to hide in the river. That could be in a log jam, in an undercut bank. Sometimes they'll just overwinter at the bottom of a shallow pool. They're really just looking for something to protect them from flood currents, and where they're a little challenging to see, because some predators will go looking for them in the winter. Otters, for example, have been known to go pull up turtles and bring them onto the ice.
And how do they breathe?
They don't.
If they're overwintering and they're buried.
Yeah, so they have direct access. I mean, they're not usually buried. They have they're in contact with the water, but their metabolism is about 5% what it would be during the summer. So their oxygen requirements are incredibly low. And at that 5% metabolism, they can get all of the oxygen they need by absorbing it directly from the water, mostly through the lining of their mouth. and their cloaca, which, I mean, if you Google this, you'll quickly run into the term butt breathing. But during the summer, they can't do that. Their metabolism is too high, so they could easily drown in the summer, whereas turtles now haven't breathed air for 5 months or so.
And these are not turtles that you will see basking in the sun on a log or a rock near the water or something.
On
They can-
rare occasions, but it's not their preferred way of sunning themselves.
Very interesting.
Well, thank you, Kylie. That was a wonderful presentation. And if anyone has any questions, we know how to contact you or contact me, and we'll get you in touch with Kylie. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the business meeting, or if you have other things to do, feel free to leave us.
Thank
Yeah,
you
I'll
so
head out.
much.
It's been a day, but yeah, great chatting with you all. And yeah, feel free to reach out if there's more to discuss.
Okay,
That was terrific. Thank you, Kylie.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.